Everyone is still talking about mortgage rates, supply and demand, but there's something that came up recently that not many people are talking about, at least in my arena. And that is a new federal housing bill that just signed into law. And while it, as you know, it won't change the market overnight, it won't reshape how Americans buy, sell, or invest in real estate over the next several years. At the same time, social media is, filled with claims about illegal immigrants receiving FHA loans and foreclosures and government housing policies. And some of these claims are true, and some are partially true, and some simply aren't supported by any evidence whatsoever. So today we're going to kind of mix some things together because I had people ask me about stuff, and we're going to separate the headlines from the facts. So anyway, welcome back to the Taillight Podcast. I'm Steve Undrum. I'm a retired Michigan State Trooper, Army veteran, real estate investor, and creator of the SWAN method. During my years in law enforcement, I learned something that applies just as much to investing as it did to criminal investigations. Very important. What that is taking a Cartesian method of looking at something and dividing it up into 5 different paragraphs of who, what, when, where, and possibly with the ability of why and with the option of how, and trying to decipher what's there. It's very important. And you should be doing the same thing with a lot of things in your life, and to remove the emotion out. Why is always an emotion, and so is how. But you want the who, what, when, where, and is a very important part of that aspect. It gets the evidence, it deciphers the evidence, and it separates it out from all the other fluff that seems to distract you. So this first story that we're going to talk about is rarely the whole story. So witnesses are usually emotional. Rumors spread quickly. There's a lot of clickbait involved in this, and everyone believes that they're right because of the way they present it. But evidence doesn't care about the opinions. Nobody cares what you think. Evidence just simply tells the truth. And you have to pay attention to that, because you can be gone down a bad rabbit hole. And we're going to try to apply this mindset today to what's happening in today's housing market. So let's first talk about the housing bill. The housing bill, let's start with what's actually changed. So the new federal housing legislation, the way I understand it, focuses on 5 primary areas. It's limiting the additional purchases of existing single-family homes by very large institutional investors. Now, my understanding is some of these large institutional investors are not, well, I'm in Michigan, so it doesn't really apply here. Apparently, they didn't come into the state that much, but there are some other ones that have, and they're, buying in a lot of these houses, single-family homes, and edging out some of these mom and pops. This is something I was never really concerned about, by the way, but this is something that's going to limit them, because there's a way around this. And it's something that the SWAN method does, I think, is very advantageous, is to get around these big, large investors. So the other thing is encouraging additional housing construction. Now, I don't build houses, I rehab houses. And this is very important. It kind of helps get through the permitting process and takes away a lot of this stuff. That's my understanding. Because it's been very difficult for some of these builders to build the new houses because of all the regulations, which is, stopping from housing, and it's taken away from the bottom line, so they can't do it. And they're also going to start supporting some of these community banks and local lending, which is huge, because a bank that understands the community and how they can do this is paramount to the survivability of a community. So this is great. And this is a really good idea, because while people complain about banks can be your friend if you know how to use them properly, and they want to lend you money. So be favorable. So I always say, be favorable to them wanting to lend money to you. Don't look at them as the bad guy. Look at them as the good guy, because they are. You don't tax money being lent to you. I mean, you have to pay an interest rate, but think about it. Some of the tax money that you get is 35%. Well, that's larger than the 7% that they're charging you for the loan when you make money. That's a different episode, but I went off on a tangent. Sorry. But I was talking to a client earlier today about that. And I said, but anyway, sorry. Back to we'll refocus, Steve. None of these changes will transform the market overnight, because real estate moves slow. It's very forgiving because it moves slow. you should be watching a lot of the steps if you get stuck behind, and it usually notifies you if you're going to make a bad deal. But these policies that I mentioned could influence housing supply and buyer competition in your area over the next several years. And it's worth paying attention to, extremely paying attention to. Now, here's a rumor that a lot of people are talking, at least they're trying to talk to me about and bring it up. We're going to shift gears just slightly. So over the past few weeks, some stuff has come up on social media. I don't know where it's coming from, but they've heard people have come up and asked me like, "Hey, Steve, is it true the FHA loans are being given to illegal, undocumented immigrants, and now those homes are going to foreclosure because of ICE and all this stuff like that and everything else?" And it's a fair question. It really is. And we got to understand the FHA is a government-backed loan, and there's parameters and there's restrictions to it. I mean, there's a benefit to it, but there's also a restriction to it. And it's a fair question, I guess. You could ask, like, yeah, you could see if you believe that, you could see how that would go that way. But there's a perfect example of why evidence matters. I have no evidence of that. I saw this as somebody sent me something out of a guy, he had to be out of, I don't know, one of the southern states, saying that he has this. I don't know how he would know that for sure. They would be FHA loans, and the person that actually did it was an undocumented immigrant. They usually want IDs, banks do, to go through, but I don't have any evidence at all that this has happened. Even other mortgage people are like, I don't see how this happens. But here's what the available evidence is. So historically, FHA insured mortgages, means they're backed by the government, are not broadly available to undocumented immigrants. Now, before 2025, some borrowers with lawful temporary status, people who were recognized by the government being here, that were immigrants, people who had legal authorization to live and work in the United States, which is what we want, we're a country of immigrants, could qualify if they met FHA underwriting requirements. And that means even the house has to meet it and everybody else, right? That's very different from saying that undocumented people we don't know, and we're just giving money and houses to people that shouldn't be here. We don't know who they are, and to FHA financing. And then in 2025, from my understanding, HUD made the eligibility rules more restrictive by limiting FHA eligibility primarily to U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents. Well, money's getting tight. It's not because there's a hatred for them, but money's starting to get tight. You look at a lot of things that come along in the government whenever the economy starts to get a little bit thinner. We've seen this in the past. I've been alive about a half a century, and we've seen the undulating up and down of the economy, right? And when that things happened, even from 2008, things got tighter. People who would generally qualify for a conventional loan wouldn't get qualified. So it wasn't just the issue of what we're talking about now. It was the issues talking about just Americans that had W-2 jobs weren't getting the loans that they needed or anything else. But that was because the mortgage industry was getting tight. The government was getting tight. I know I'm going very broad, but we see that. So the policy actually became tighter, not looser. Well, money's not become as available. It happens. So if we address the foreclosure claim, I mean, for sure, foreclosures certainly exist, especially when jobs aren't as plentiful. When you lose that single source income into a job of an FHA loan, I mean, things of like divorce, that'll ruin your credit, everything else. Medical issues, I've had that with certain clients. Higher insurance costs because of whatever's going on in your life. Property taxes is a big thing. We're seeing it all over. Adjustable rate mortgages, if you got that, the ARM mortgages, or just plain financial hardship. But I have not found any credible evidence showing a nationwide foreclosure wave caused by undocumented immigrants receiving federally backed loans. And that's a distinction that matters. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I haven't found anything. I haven't come across anybody that they gave that to. And you probably have some theorists say, well, that's because they hide it well. Okay. Tough to hide a house that's backed by a loan. I mean, I guess it's possible, but it's tough. But I haven't found any evidence for it. Not saying it doesn't exist. Not saying it exists either. I haven't found any evidence. So I have to go with that because I just don't believe in everything that's on social media or the news, to be honest with you. So if it's not there, I don't have it, doesn't exist. So here's why this conversation each keeps getting becoming confused because people combine several completely different loan programs into one story or different sources of information. They mix together things like FHA loans, conventional loans, private ITIN loans, borrowers with temporary legal status, you know, and then they filter in it's an undocumented immigrant when they don't even know if they're an undocumented or if they got legal temporary. There's a lot of different variables that you have to differentiate, and you come to this assumption that this is what's going on, and that's a bad assumption. I mean, you have to go with evidence-driven information, and you have to be evidence-driven. Even in real estate, as an investor or your private money lender, you have to be driven by the facts, not by emotion and not by partial facts, and then try to fill in the gaps. And that you can assume, but you better not act on it, you know. So when those distinctions disappear, misinformation grows, and only the salacious, the sexy thing part of it is a part that grows and then takes everything distorted. So that's why I always query the SWAN method of just simple, actual, factual information before you make a move. And it's not just about evaluating property. The SWAN method is there to evaluate information. So every day, we're flooded with headlines of interest rates, filtered in with politics, with the assumption of housing crashes and all these government programs and money flying out here and going over here. TikTok experts giving partial truth to get more clicks and likes, and same thing with Facebook posts and everything else. And the question isn't, is this interesting? Which they are, because that's why they got your attention. Is it supported by evidence? And of course, if it's interesting and you didn't hear it from anybody else, you only heard it from a few people, that's an emotional, they're trying to get your emotions going and get you angry or get you anxious about something. It catches your attention. And quite frankly, real estate's boring. It moves slow. It's great to have a great life so you can do other things, but it's boring. It moves slow. And that's the benefit of it. But you get a great tax break because of it. You get a passive income because of it. And these are evidence-driven decisions that create confidence, not emotional decisions that, get to be expensive. Anything that you have done on emotion, like a quick buy or impulsive buy, you generally regret, right? Like, I didn't need that. I didn't need that other thing. Look at all the impulsive buys you end up throwing out because they're impulsive. This looks cool. Whatever that may be, this widget. They're never all that great. And you wasted a lot of money. And so it's evidence-driven decisions that create confidence that keep you in the game. And so here's the bigger lesson. I have other people that tell me constantly, should I wait or I am going to wait. I'm going to wait for the interest rates to go down. I'm going to wait for the election. Oh, Lord, why are we not holding our breath for an election? Wait for prices to crash. Okay, you're going to wait for that? If the deal makes sense because you have the evidence, then take advantage of it. Are you going to wait for the next government program? Like I'm hearing that they're going to do this. Oh my God, who comes up with this stuff? I don't know. Here's my answer. Waiting isn't a strategy. It's not. It's a buffer zone. It's a way to not put yourself out there in a risk and actually realize this is how you need to live. It's getting out of your comfort zone sometimes by getting involved in real estate. It's getting out of it's realizing your potential. It's raising the ceiling, taking that ceiling off you and raising, see how high you can go. But when you wait, that's just everything pulling you back. That's staying on that hamster wheel so you can just run it faster and faster and faster until you get exhausted and you go from a sprint to a jog. And then pretty soon, this is it. This is all you're doing is running on a hamster wheel. But evidence gets you out of that because it shows you the way, shows you the path, shows you the way you should go and start marking your path to become financially free. Gives you that confidence that yes, you can actually be that person that has multiple sources of income. You're not relying on all your whole family's not relying on a single source income, all your travel sports, all your car payments, all your medical bills, everything relying on that single source. And when that single source says, we no longer need you here because the market has shifted and your job is no longer wanted, you got so many things coming out of that paycheck because of single source. One of my incomes, if it goes down, I have another source to cover that. You need to consider multiple sources. I'm not saying quit your jobs. No. So maybe consider getting another source of income, a rental, or invest into an apartment or something, or maybe lend money out. There's all kinds of different things. But it's involved in real estate because it's real. It's not backed by stocks, bonds, ETFs. So when the evidence is there and it says, sometimes it says buy, sometimes it says sell. Sometimes it does say wait. We need to wait a little bit. But the decision should not come a position of emotion, and definitely not fear or resentment, and that's based on fear, but anything else. So you should ask yourself some questions. Like, whenever you're making a real estate decision, you always ask yourself some questions like, does this decision move me closer to my goals? And your goals should be written down and it should support that. I want to do X. What evidence supports this decision to me to go do X? What assumptions I am making that I could find out to reduce the degree of how big my assumption is? In other words, you're making a decision, and is the assumption of this decision, is it 80% of the decision that you're making? Like, are you taking a TikTok video, you're watching a TikTok video of a guy that says, hey, the FHA loans are in foreclosure because of undocumented immigrants. Okay. I would say that's 10%. Maybe there's something, maybe not. You need to really figure out the other 90% if that's even true before you even act on anything, right? So what is the percentage of the assumption, and how do you find out the answer? If you can't find out the answer, then you're just going to have to move on and say, well, I heard it, but I don't know if it's true. Cannot engage in that. So, and if you're wrong, are you going to be able to sleep well at night on that decision if you have took a 90% risk on a 10% question? So you can't chase every headline, every video, and everything else. And you have to figure out how you're going to create these evidence-based fact-finding missions, so to speak, to make sure this is what you're going after, stumbling. So the housing market over the next years will continue to change. Will continue to change. And new laws come and go. Some will come and push in, push out because of everything. Everything's changing. Interest rates are going to rise and fall. Politics, unfortunately, we always create headlines and create that fear because that's how they get reelected. Don't get caught up in that trap. That's how they get their job back, because they got to create that fear, because then they're going to create that solution. Think about it, every politician creates a fear. If I'm not elected, we got to stop X. And that's how they keep their job. Think of it. They're looking to maintain employment. So they're going to tell you how valuable are. All you do is cast that vote. I wouldn't believe it, because that past several years, are you better off or worse off than what you were? And I don't care what party side you're on. You got to ask yourself that question. Are you better or worse off? So, and rumors will continue to spread across social media because of likes, clicks, engagement. But there's one thing that never changes: good, hard facts, supported by evidence, using the Cartesian method, using the SWAN method. Evidence always beats the assumptions every single time. If you would like help making evidence-driven decisions about buying, selling, or investing in real estate, I'd love to have that conversation with you, of course. My goal isn't simply to buy or sell another property at all. It isn't just that. My goal is to help you make decisions that help you sleep well at night, so you made that good decision, so you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. I'm Steve Unruh. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Tail Light Podcast. And until next time, keep your eyes on the road ahead, and don't forget to check your tail lights. Make sure they're working so you don't get pulled over. But everybody have a great weekend. Thank you.